when we look at Georgia, Georgia is a stronghold of Western alliances. შევდივართ რა სოციალურ კონტრაქტში, ვამბობთ რომ ჩვენ თვითონ ქმნით ხელისუფლებას.
Wir haben heute eine Genehmigung bekommen, im Lager Al-Hol zu filmen. Rund ein Dutzend Raketen hätten die russischen Militärs auf ihr Lager gefeuert. Kadir Tukcu ist 2014 aus Hamburg nach Syrien gekommen.
I want to welcome everyone to the first edition of the ADAMI Focus, the new format of the ADAMI Media Prize for Cultural Diversity in Eastern Europe, where with discussions about current media topics and now the current discussion about racism that has been going on in the USA. And to discuss also racism and diversity issues in the media in the Eastern Partnership countries of the European Union. So we are very happy about our first guest, Gеоргием Маргвелашвili, former Georgian president, and about our first host, Katrin Eigendorf, who is a ZDF special correspondent. And I will be a little bit of a technical support here. I hope a good one from now. And so we have a talk, about 20 minutes, half an hour between Katrin and Mr. Margvelashvili. And after this, we will have the possibility for the audience to ask questions. Therefore, we have this, Zoom has this function to raise your hand. So you can click on the button if you have questions when we come to the Q&A part. And I will call you so that you can ask a question in live. So I think I will give the word to Katrin now. Thank you for being here. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Filio, for this nice introduction. Yeah, I wish you all welcome to this first ADAMI format. A very welcome, very warm welcome to Mr. Margvelashvili. Happy to have you here as our guest, and I would like to jump immediately into my first question. The whole world is looking to the United States, the case of George Floyd, the death of the 40-year-old African-American has caused protests all over the world. Did it have an impact on your country, on Georgia?
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me and giving me possibility to discuss and share with you. I don't think that this case has much resonated in the Georgian existing political or public discussion. There was a small protest meeting somewhere in the center of the city, where people have expressed their position on this issue. Plus, I know people are discussing this and amongst each other, but it has not really become a part of an intensive discussion or yeah, it hasn't become something like that. Though people, I mean, politically, though people talk about this, I mean, I think that in any case, this case has triggered basically the same feelings like we have in US. Many of people in US have understood more about the problems with African Americans and their sort of the problems of this minority, and have got more into depth of something that has been spoken out a lot but was not always shared by ordinary citizens. So the Black Lives Matter, I think, now has done a great educational job in US. I think the same thing, but in a much more smaller content, has happened in Georgia, based on this case.
Yeah. Georgia is a very cultural diverse country. The whole region is a very cultural diverse region. Could we say that this subject of cultural diversity is back on the topics? Is this an issue today?
Well, strangely, yes. I mean, I would say that you mean cultural diversity in context of protection of minorities. That's what your question. Yeah, I did not, to be very frank, I did not expect that one or the other forms of racism or phobias could get sort of that intensity which we have got in several late years. Somehow in my mind, I always thought that, yeah, okay, this is happening, but and wrongly, I thought that, the line of history is going to decrease any kind of racism or any kind of phobias just instantly by its own. And if we had something like happening 20 years ago, it is not going to happen anymore. I mean, that it will eliminate by itself. But apparently, it's not like that. I mean, you have to fight these dragons inside yourself, inside society all the time. And that apparently that is not linked with the development of humankind. Those things keep popping out and emerging. And I think that Georgia has lately had politically very active issues on LGBT direction, sometimes issues linked with some forms of racism. Basically, I remember some protests that were linked with sort of Asian population here. It was strange for me and worrying to observe it, and of course I had to react in all those cases.
So if I understand your point of view well, you think that cultural diversity is part of a free society and this should not be taken for granted, that we have to engage in fighting for this?
Yeah, and Georgia is actually an example of that. I mean, we are a nation that has always tried to put forward as a positive message that we are culturally diverse, that we are religiously diverse society, and that we had in some of the top moments of our history are linked to openness of society and inclusiveness of society. We sort of liked it all the time, but then it turned out that a couple of times it's not automatic. It's not that you are born Georgian and if you don't fight against those dragons or against those fears that are in yourself and in your society, that it is going to stay by its own. So unfortunately, we all the time have to fight for these values, and it does not come by its own. It's every generation has to put a pillar in this direction.
When you were president of Georgia between 2013 and 2018, when I remember well, the Georgian public TV had 7 language programs. Is language a key to cultural diversity?
Well, it depends. In Georgia, I think that we don't really have a proper approach to that issue specifically on the language level. When I was Minister of Education, when I was President, I very intensively invested in learning language learning programs with the Armenian and Azeri minorities, basically. But we did not use, and we said no to Russian as lingua franca in this region. And of course, there are arguments about that because of the relationships with Russia and so on. But I think that this is a mistake. We had Russian, I mean, these people will learn Georgian anyway. But Russian as a communication language with our closest neighbors, also within our own our biggest minorities, but also closest neighbors. I think that this opportunity should not be lost, and we should invest into communicating with these minorities on the language that is comfortable for them today. And this is a basis for inclusion. So eventually, of course, Russian will die out in this region, and it will be it will be Armenians and Azeris, Georgian citizens will be speaking Georgian. But we are losing time and don't having them enclosed into a political and public life of this country.
As you said, each generation has to have its own agenda in fighting for cultural diversity. Where do you see the agenda for our generation?
In which country? In Georgia?
Let's say in the region.
Well, I think that major issue now is the sort of the LGBT rights issue is the top issue in the region. I would not, I mean, based on a very tragic history that we have all gone through, basically Armenians, Azeris, and Georgians as well, in our own way, but ethnical issue, which was top issue on the agenda after the collapse of Soviet Union. I think we all learned our lessons more or less, that this is a very dangerous issue that we should not touch ever. And we sort of, our generation has burned their hands and faces on this issue. But the religious issue is somehow based on the environment that we are in, and also on the more or less secular orientation of the society. I think it's also less on the top of list of the possible dangers. But the issue linked with LGBT rights and the situation that there's people from time to time come through, I think that this seems like a top issue right now on the agenda when we are talking about protection of the rights of minorities.
Yeah, I would like to draw the focus a little bit more on ethnic minorities and diversity in ethnic cultural context. In this context, from a standpoint of a politician, can this be enhanced by politics, by politicians, or where does cultural diversity have to be guaranteed by?
Well, I think that cultural diversity should be guaranteed by the legislation, and the legislation and it's a role of politicians to it depends. I mean, when you are in politics, you basically try to develop the nation into direction that you think is best. Yeah. So if cultural diversity is on your agenda, what you do is you protect it. And as I'm saying, I don't think that there is they need that much direct protection. But then you try to enhance legislation that is giving opportunities, creating opportunities for the minorities, like providing possibly segments of the budget that guarantee cultural opportunities for these minorities, that guarantee some kind of, it depends on which kind of minority, which kind of ethnical minority are we talking about, that basically you look at these people, or maybe location, or they might be located in one place or be around the country, and you try to figure out what are the main things that they need to survive as a minority and to contribute to nation as a whole with their individuality. And that might be preserving their language, that might be preserving and publishing some books, or that might be preserving their local some traditions and respecting them. But it's after the level of just protecting that they have their rights, you start thinking, or maybe you have a leader, a local leader who can help you in doing that. But yeah, I mean that's of course it could be and should be enhanced by politics and by politicians who have that issues on their agenda.
What about journalists? What role should journalists play in this whole debate?
Well, I think the role of journalists, like the case of Floyd, definitely shows how powerful media is. If there was not that 8-minute 46-second video that was circulated and that gave visual images to all of us, and if there was no free media, I don't think that just a story that some person has been murdered by police would trigger this level of reaction all around the world. By the way, and it's interesting that we see mass protests not only in the United States but also in other countries. But what should journalists do? I think that journalists play a really crucial role, not only in showing cases like this, which is their direct responsibility, but also triggering discussion. And I think that this is one is case like Floyd, which you watch and the report is going, and then you are just giving this info. But the other thing, this is the first part, the alarm, where the alarm bell rings. But the most important thing starts after that, after we have seen this, and we have to deal with this, and we have to live with this in further. And there's where the real content of journalism comes in, is getting people together to discuss. And this is very important. Journalists must trigger discussions. Any kind of phobia, any kind of forms of chauvinism and things like that, they are solved through discussions. And it is very important that journalists create that kind of spaces. So in this case, journalists becomes not, in this case, journalists become not simply reporters who collect and distribute information, but they become politicians in context of shaping public opinion and giving a chance to some kind of solution of this problem. So I think that really these are the areas where which journalists create for discussion, where things are really calmed down and really are where we could look for solutions.
So, as I understand you, journalists should engage in enhancing cultural diversity by making this a positive story?
They should engage. No, they shouldn't make it a positive or a negative. It's better if they just give the story, but by bringing parties together, by creating formats and forums for discussion. And this is very important. I mean, they, as mediators of, they are not only suppliers for public opinion, but they are also mediators for public opinion, trying those opinions to be brought to the broader discussion. And they're creating a format and a forum for this discussion, because that is how those issues are solved. Any kind of fear is maintained and enhanced when you don't see the person, when you don't see a live being, when this is just a brand for you, when this is just something that you could, when this is some negative image which you attack. As soon as you bring the two persons in face to face and create the environment for discussion, intellectually and also emotionally, this is the premises for the solution, I believe.
I would like to interrupt our discussion for a short second, because I would like to take the opportunity to focus your attention on ADAMI, which is exactly about what you are talking. We would like to enhance journalists to engage in this story of cultural diversity, to advocate cultural diversity, to tell these stories. And ADAMI is continuing its competition. So we will have the ADAMI Prize 2020, and we will show like a little film about that. And we would like to see as many as possible journalists to apply and to compete for this wonderful prize. So even if you are not a journalist, please let people know about this competition. We would like to invite as many journalists as possible from the region for our next ADAMI Prize 2020. From your perspective, you're not only a politician, you're also a media specialist. What stories should journalists tell? Could you give us a concrete example from the region, from your country, maybe from other countries? Where would you see stories where you say, okay, this is a story journalists should focus on?
You mean in context of minorities?
In context of minorities and cultural diversity, of ethnic minorities?
Well, I think that we should try to give as much information about the personalities and go in depth of personalities when we are discussing these issues. This is one important thing for me is just showing the living being, with their fears, with their hopes, with their problems, with their life stories. On one hand, and basically maybe doing the same thing when we are talking about the ones who are on the other side of the story, because the people who are engaged in bullying or engaged in fight against any kind of minorities, I think that they also have tragic stories. Maybe it is not interesting because they are the ones who are oppressors, But on the other hand, they also, this in itself, this in itself is this aggressiveness in itself is a reflection of some kind of very deep-rooted tragedy or trauma or something like that, that has forced these people to become so unhuman. And sort of revealing their stories also, giving them possibility to talk, to express themselves, and tell their stories why they act as inhuman beings, and try to strip those the oppressor and the oppressed, to strip them from their general brands and bring those personalities in front and let those people communicate with each other and with society. If that would be possible, I think that is the premises for reconciliation, because we can reconcile when we are talking about individuals, when we are talking about human beings. That's where we reconcile, when we recognize another human being in someone who is confronting us. That is one thing. The other thing is that I think the journal, especially Georgia journalists could concentrate on our very rich history as a resource for information. I mean, what sort of revealing our culture, who we are, and looking at the examples, positives and negatives as well, as a part of of a source, let's say, for their ongoing reporting.
Okay, I think on the question of how to enhance cultural diversity by showing minorities, ethnic groups as human beings in all their cultural context, couldn't agree more. But when it comes to the question of how to deal with parties or movements that are fighting cultural diversity, that picture clear enemy groups, is this the right way to deal with them, to give them like a forum for their ideas?
It's very
I have
important.
difficulties to follow on this as a German, maybe especially.
Yeah, I understand. No, of course it depends. It depends what we are talking about here, and it depends what level of parties or what level of violence we are talking about. But I believe that liberalism should not be, till it really comes to the level of openly propagating violence. Till that level, I think that liberalism, the content of liberalism, is in giving possibility for these people not to propaganda their ideas, but asking them specific questions and bringing their fears or bringing their mistakes to a moment of truth. I think that this is the way out. I don't believe that we label just someone racist or label someone homophobe and then forget about that person, and that person is erased from the public, from the media. It is impossible. You cannot silence anyone, and they will find and they will become even more angry. They'll become even more alienated. They'll find their peers in social media, and they'll become much more organized. So I think that one of the mistakes of liberals is that they are very quick to label. They are very quick to label, and they are very quick to put negative signs on someone who is not 100% like them. And then after this, they think that they have expelled these people from public out, but they have not. I mean, what we see so many times is that, especially with the social networking, these people find each other. They become sources for propaganda for countries like Russian Federation. Alienated from the mainstream, they become a good base for propaganda. So I'm saying, till it comes to the direct popularization of violence, Liberalism is not in labeling people, but is engaging them in a very in-depth dialogue. I believe in that.
So you believe in the open discussion?
I do believe that just saying about someone that that person is a homophobe or is racist or is something like that, and then saying that we don't talk with that person is a wrong approach. You are losing that. You are not, this person is not lost. This person is gained for propaganda and for much more aggressiveness. We have to enhance dialogues. And what I've seen so much about the liberals in Georgia, and not only in Georgia, is they are very, picky. They are like, oh, this person is, don't talk with this person. This is homophobe, and that's it. As if they have solved the issues. No, the issue is solved when you engage in a dialogue, find weak places in their argument, show them their problems, enhance dialogue, and show them that they are wrong.
So should we in the ADAMI community, with the countries participating and supporting ADAMI, also get into this dialogue more, you would say?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, I believe that should be done. I mean, what's the point for people who, let's say, who are not racist or are not homophobes, or to sit together and discuss issues that we agree upon? Where is the fun? I mean, I sit together with 10 people who are clearly anti-homophobic, and so we cheer each other, we tell each other how smart, educated, and progressive are we. It's boring. It's much more interesting to bring a person that has different attitude and try to prove to that person that they are wrong, and try to get into discussion with that. And the smarter that person is, the better the outcome. Because, I mean, I think we believe that we are on the right side of the history. So, on the right side of values. So we should be able and capable. Well, I know we are, and we should be able and capable of proving those issues to people who think differently. And not only escape the discussion with just labeling them as a people on the wrong side of history, or block-minded or racist or whatever.
Good point. I would like to open the discussion up to people who joined us. Maybe there are questions. I think this is a very interesting point that might create questions from the other participants. I would be happy to have some questions from you, and maybe there are some.
So the first question, we have one question in the chat already. I think we touched these topics, but I will read it anyway. Should we educate Georgian society, or maybe society in the Eastern Europe or in the region in general, on ethnic minority issues, like we are trying to educate population in the field of media literacy?
Oh, I think very much so, and especially in Georgia, I think we should educate society and on general issues linked to, but also very specifically on the issues of on the Georgian ethnic minorities issues. I mean, we don't learn that in school. Like, I've learned, I have my experience about ethnic minorities just because of my living environment, where I've lived. I mean, I've lived in old Tbilisi, where you have so many ethnic minorities. I mean, we were like Russian, Jew, Armenian, Azeri, yeah, who else? Greek. This was our yard. I mean, and Georgians, different Georgians, plus from east and west. So this was my living environment where I learned it. But then I learned a lot just traveling through this country, and I didn't know a lot about different kinds of ethnic minorities that live in Georgia. So I think that is our huge opportunity for education in that respect. And I think basically this should be done in school. because it should be a general knowledge that we share. It's not that much a profession. It could become a profession later, but it should be a general knowledge that we share, all of us. I mean, what are the traditions? What is Nowruz? What is Rosh Hashanah or something like? We learn this. We learn this just because because I was living in Tbilisi. If I was living in some other part of Georgia, I might meet only Georgians. But I think on the school level, yes.
Very good point. Maybe some more questions?
We have one question, Hubertus Hahn, so I will...
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
I can hear you.
Well, thank you very much for this talk. I have a more general question about the church. Because as you know, I mean, Gеorгием Маргвелашвили, I mean, the church is effectively above the law at the moment. I mean, this is shown at the Easter communion procedures and all of that. But of course, its attitude towards cultural or any kind of diversity is also something that might be discussed. So I wonder if you could say a few words how we could tackle that, just specifically in the Georgian case.
Well, the church is a whole complete issue to discuss. I mean, there are very many issues to be discussed in that direction. Let me first state a couple issues regarding the church's attitude towards minorities. First, church recognizes some of the minorities, and that are, I don't know by which standard, but that are major religions like Catholics, Muslims. I think Baptists also. Sort of big religions are recognized by the church, and I don't know according to which standard those are chosen and which are included and which are not included. I remember church being really actively against Jehovah's Witnesses. Why were they an issue? I don't know by now, but so they recognize some kind of minorities. Another issue is issue linked with their recognition of the LGBT community, and I think that this is very understandable. That church, with its traditional moral code, which is not developed by them, or which cannot be altered by them, but which is within this script and within this teaching, they have a negative attitude towards something that is different than classical marriage, let's say. The problem starts not in that fact that the church should recognize or should celebrate LGBT. The problem starts when we see the level of unacceptance. And I've talked about this so many times with representatives of church, and I was asking them, why is LGBT such a big thing? I mean, we live in a world where you can easily communicate with people who conduct adultery, who conduct, who are thieves, or who have been even murderers, and I understand that LGBT is a sin in your standards, but how come it's such a big sin? Yeah, and because, and I completely understand that within this teaching, anything but standard marriage is unacceptable. But why so unacceptable? And there we see something that becomes a little bit more dangerous than simply liking or disliking of things like that. And there we see that consciously or unconsciously or somehow this is the main agenda of our enemy from the north. I mean, Russia has taken this flag of fighting against LGBT community as an ideological base in these regions, in the regions of their existence. And they have plus actively engaged different groups, politicians, church, in the propaganda of anti-LGBT movements. So from a theoretical issue of church's attitude towards LGBT, we move to political and of Russia's propaganda in the region. And I think that in that respect, once more, I would trigger a dialogue. I would trigger a dialogue. I mean, that's what I tell you. And I had often this dialogue with clergy. I'm like, I understand that everything but regular marriage is something that you don't respect, don't accept. But explain me, why is it so high on your agenda? And that's where they had a very hard time. And I think that this should be happening in the media, in front of public, and let them explain. I mean, not just, once again, not labeling them, but giving them tough questions. This is, I believe, the solution for this kind of issues.
Okay, we have one more question. And just to remind you, if you want to ask a question live, you can use the function of raising your hand. So I will see it and I can unmute you. We have one more question in the chat. How can media bring different-minded people together? It seems that nowadays the media and their audiences are becoming increasingly segregated. For example, left, right, liberal, or conservative.
Yeah, and that's a big problem. I mean, I agree with that evaluation. Media becomes increasingly segregated, and following society, which is becoming increasingly segregated, and the society is following media. We talked about this in the beginning. Even the social networking, which was supposed to be a much more bigger democratic forum for huge number of people, have turned in another way. It has become a way for very enclosed groups to find each other and stay close again, but with bigger numbers. And this is very dangerous and strange, and also something that I think is a very good basis for any kind of phobias and any kind of confrontation, because people find their own truth and they congregated around this truth and they don't want to hear others. Still, I think media is much more media has much more possibilities than the social networks, because in media you have a journalist. You have a journalist as a human thinking, informed being, which can trigger. Social networks, if they are triggered from bad guys. I mean, good guys don't manipulate social media. If they are triggered by bad guys. But journalism is a resource for shaping public opinion and creating a network of communications. Once again, maybe 10 years ago, we thought that social networking would create a broader social cooperation. But no, it did the opposite. It created segregation. And now there's more role for the media, for journalists, personalities who create issues, who bring the issues to public, who package those issues in a forms that are understandable, and for their dedication in this direction.
Yeah, good point. So if I try to resume what we were discussing about, to take it further also for our work with journalists, for our discussion in the ADAMI group, what you propose is a broader discussion between all parts, the minorities, but also for those who see them as enemies. Yeah, to have an open discussion, very important. I think this is an issue in many countries. This is a discussion in Germany as well. not an easy answer to find. And I mean, every country has its own history, and yeah, we have to see how to deal with it. But I think it's a good idea to open the discussion to all parties, because it doesn't make a big difference if we stay among us who are all convinced that cultural diversity is something we have to fight for and to achieve. And what I think is also a very interesting idea is that we have to tell the stories of the minorities, that we have to portray them as human beings. I think that is important. So I would like to leave the last idea. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Should governments improve or develop a different and more positive approach to media and its role for the society? Should governments improve or develop a different and more positive approach to media and its role for the society?
It's an issue concerning which government?
Governments in general.
Well, I think that we should come to some kind of a, and there is basically some kind of code of conduct of politicians towards media and of governments towards media. There is a code of conduct, and I don't think that it should be punishable, but I think that society should enhance some kind of code of conduct of attitude of politician and journalists. And these should be done not by the government. This should be done by media, basically. I would say that media should be collegial with each other whenever governments or simply politician either insults or segregates or mistreats media. I think that first of all, it starts from the journalists and their understanding that they should have professional dedication to each other, unless we are talking about some kind of real outrageous case. I mean, there are some people that are calling themselves journalists, which have no connection to the profession, just simply holding a mic and behaving really bad. I mean, if a person with a microphone comes and hits me on the head, I don't think that every journalist should say, well, I think this person was right. No, that's not the right approach. But basically, it starts from media treating each other, no matter which part of the media they represent, as supporters, as a profession. And of course, then the society. I don't think government has any kind of good practices towards media. I wouldn't like government supporting media. As soon as government starts supporting media or gives media some kind of privileges, except the privilege of reporting, where you should know that the person with the camera shouldn't be shot or shouldn't be beaten. Till that point, I don't think that beyond that, giving privileges to media is a good practice. As soon as someone gives you privilege, you have a good attitude towards each other. And this becomes very strange, why journalists who should be reporting on government are getting privileges from the government. So I think that it's the class of journalists that should be creating standards in supporting and enhancing each other's public protection and public recognition.
Thank you so much. I think this is a good outlook to our work. Still a lot to be done. I think what you mentioned as important, that government should not control journalists, that journalists should be what we call the fourth power, and that what we call cultural diversity should be a case journalists should engage in. Is very important. And I think with this contribution, I would like to close our session, to thank you very much that you joined us with this new format. Thank you so much. Have a nice day, and goodbye.
Goodbye. Bye.
Yeah, I also I want to thank you. So both of you, Katrin and Mr. Margvelashvili, thank you so much for joining us today, for having this interesting discussion. And next week we will have focus a little bit on Moldova. We have the same time next Tuesday, just for everyone to know. You can join us again, and it will be Adrian Candu. It will be the former president of the parliament in Moldova. And Caroline Olivier will be the host, so she will ask a question next week. So we all invite you to join us again, and thank you for the interesting talk.
Thanks. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.